In today's lab, I want to talk about the OSPF Process ID. I will have 3 separate labs to show you 3 different scenarios. In the first lab, I will have a router 5, 1, and 2 on the same process ID. All will be process ID 1. On the lab 2, I will use router 9, 10, and 11, and I will use different process ID 9, 10, and 11 to show you that the OSPF process ID is only locally significant. And in the last lab, I show you what will happen if you take 3 routers, and one of the routers will be process ID 1, the other one will be also 1, and the one in the middle I will split in half and do one of the interfaces in process ID 1 and one of the interfaces in a process ID 2. We'll show you what will happen with the routing table and with the reachability from the router 5 and router 2. So let's begin. Let's start with the lab 1, where we have a router 5, 1, and 2, all connected with OSPF established, and all 3 routers using OSPF process 1. So let's have a look. Router 5, if we do show run section router OSPF, we can see the process ID is 1. If we go on the router 1 and do the same command, show run section router OSPF 1, same process ID 1. And on the router 2, show run section router OSPF 1. Just make sure there is no other process. Router OSPF 1. So we can see the OSPF process ID is the same across all the 3 routers. If I jump onto the router 1, because the one is in the middle, we do show IP OSPF neighbor. We can see there's adjacency between the 2 routers. And if I jump onto router 2 and do ping 5.5.5.5, I have a reachability. So on those 2 routers, the process ID is the same, but still process ID is only locally significant. Let's have a look at the lab 2, where I will show you the process ID will be different on every router, but it's the functionality for the OSPF is the same. Let's have a look at the lab number 2, where we have routers 9, 10, and 11, and all 3 routers have a different OSPF process ID. Router 9, we do show run section router OSPF. We can see the process ID is OSPF 9. On the router 10, show run section router OSPF. It's a process ID number 10. And on the 11, show run section router OSPF is a process ID 11. If I do show IP OSPF neighbors or neighbor, we can see there's a full agency with the other 2 routers. So OSPF is working, even the process ID is different on all 3 routers. Now, let's have a look at the last lab, lab number 3, where we go back into routers 5, 1, and 2, and we will split the router 1 and use the 2 different process ID for each of the interfaces, and we will see what will happen with the reachability. Let's start with the last lab. So routers 5, 1, and 2, all 3 of them at the moment are configured with the process ID 1, as I showed in the first lab. Now we will go and split the router 1, where Ethernet 0/1 will be in a process 1, and Ethernet 0/0 will be in a process 2. What it will do, it will split the database, the OSPF database. Each interface will be sitting in a different OSPF database. The router will have a reachability to router 2 and a router 5, but there will not be a reachability from 2 to 5. Even the routes will be on the routing table on a R1. The only way to get the reachability between 2 and 5 will be with some kind of the redistribution. So let's have a look. First, let's try we have a reachability before we will start. So ping 2.2.2.2. Yes, we can ping the router 2. So let's jump onto the router 1 and let's have a look at the configuration. Show run section router OSPF. At the moment, process ID only 1. There is no other OSPF process. And we have 2 network statements. One for interface Ethernet 0/1 and one network statement for Ethernet 0/2. So I would like to move this network statement into the new process. So if I go conf t and I'll do first, I will remove it. So route to OSPF 1 and I'll do no network statement and it's removed. Theoretically, we should see pop up that the adjacency to router 2 is gone, which we would expect. Now I will create a new process, router OSPF 2, and I will put the network statement back in. And we should now see that the adjacency to the router 2 should come up in a second. Let's try show IP OSPF neighbor. No, we still only have a 1. I'll do show run section router OSPF. Let's check the configuration. Router OSPF 1. We have one statement, router OSPF 2. We have the second statement, so that looks all right. See what's happened here. We didn't configure the authentication. Conf, and we do router OSPF 2. And we need to add the authentication, which is also already configured on that interface and the router 2. And it should, yeah, adjacency up. So now if I go show IP OSPF neighbor, we can see we have a connection to the router 2 and connection to the router 5 as we expected. And if I do show IP OSPF, so we have the process ID 2 and a process ID 1. So we have two sections on the OSPF databases, and this is exactly what's happened on the router. So the OSPF is split in two different parts, OSPF with the process ID 1 and 2. The process ID 2 have the routes from the router 2. The process ID 1 has the routes from the router 1. If I do show IP route, I can see the routes from 2 and I can see the routes from the router 5. But if I jump onto the router 5 and do the same ping, there is no reachability. The reason is, that's the ping finish. The reason is if I do show IP route, I will not see the route 2 being redistributed because the route 2 is being sent into the router 1, OSPF process 2. By default, the OSPF process 2 will not redistribute the routes into the OSPF process 1. The only way to fix that is if we go back to the router 1 and I do show run section router OSPF. Let's have a look at the configuration. The way to fix it is conf t, and then we go first under the OSPF process 1 and we do redistribute OSPF, select the process 2. Good. Now jump onto the OSPF process 2 and do just the same command, redistribute OSPF just the process 1. And then now, once the OSPF databases will populate, if I go back here, have a look at the routing table, we can see router 2 is being injected into the routing table. It's injected as an external route. And if I do, we should have a command here, ping, the ping is successful. So this is exactly what will happen when you put the interfaces on a single router into the different OSPF process ID. As mentioned here before, OSPF process is only locally significant, but it has a consequences if you use a multiple OSPF process on a single router. So thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.